God only knows what you've been through. God only knows what they say about you. God only knows how it's killing you. But there's a kind of love that God only knows. God only knows what you've been through. God only knows what they say about you. But God only knows the real you. There's a kind of love that God only knows.
Welcome to the third episode of Your Journey is Not Over. My name is Tanya Pearson Randolph. The expressions and opinions expressed on my podcast are of mine and mine only. I own all the rights to my personal journey and to Your Journey is Not Over. Neither is to be used, copied, edited in any way without my consent. Before I begin from the beginning of my personal journey, I want to share something that happened to me just a couple weeks ago. Actually, it's a funny story. I was meeting with one of my spiritual advisors, and we were discussing my journey and how to relay it on my podcast. Out of the blue, he looked at me and he said, "You know, your soul signed up for this, right?" I was jaw dropped. I can only imagine my facial expression. I said, "No way, are you serious?" He laughed. He said, "Yes, I am serious." My facial expressions, I have been told, say 1,000 words. And also, I might add, some are pretty comical. So immediately, my mind went to, remember, I have my own way of seeing things, usually a funny way, if I might add. All these souls up on clouds, lounging and relaxing. And God speaks up and says, I have this life. It's not going to be easy. In fact, it's going to be hell. I can literally see me up there being the one raising my hand going, oh, me, me, me. All the while the other souls are going, please, God, don't see me. Don't choose me. I am the one that's so eager. I can go through hell with lots of faith and a smile on my face. That's me. Of course, I then had 100 questions for my spiritual advisor. I do want to say thank you to my spiritual advisors for always being there to try and answer all of my many questions. Once I get stuck on something, I want to know everything. Another thing, too, that I want to address before I do get started is that in no way am I trying to disrespect, degrade, or sell out the woman that gave birth to me. I have nothing but forgiveness and compassion for her, and even more understanding of her now that I have started on my healing journey and I am trying to heal my trauma. My only wish now is that I could have helped her heal her trauma. I truly tried to help her with what little tools that I had back then. I fell in like everybody else. I enabled her behavior. It was easier to get by that way, easier to get along with her that way. And she always had someone else to blame for her behavior. And believe it or not, every single person in my entire family enabled her behavior. And they fell in line with whatever she did, said, or blamed. So looking at it now with a different perspective, and with the same love and compassion that I would give a total stranger, my mother never talked about her trauma. Of course not. Swept under the rug. Hush, hush. Gotta protect whoever and whatever, right? Isn't that what we've been taught for generations? But I know she must have had some trauma for her to act and behave the way she did. Does that excuse her behavior? No. But it definitely explains some of it. See, I got this understanding when I got to a place where I stopped looking at her as my mother and I started looking at her as a human being that must have suffered something. What? I do not know. I do think about it now that she has gone, and I wish that she could have healed her trauma. It would have made her a healthier, happier person. And it's sad that she didn't. She and I had a very rocky relationship from breath one, as you will soon learn on my journey. I'm going to start at the very beginning of my personal journey. I was born January 1st, 1971. Yes, New Year's morning. I wasn't the first baby born that morning. I was told that my mom had been at a New Year's Eve party drinking and dancing the night away. In fact, she is the one who told me that story several times with pride. She told me that she no sooner got home from the party, got in bed, and she went into labor with me. Must have been the dancing. She told me there was a blizzard out, so it took a while to get to the hospital. After she got there, they told her she was too intoxicated to be given any medication, so they gave her aspirins. I've often wondered if that's where it all began as far as our relationship. Personally, I can't imagine waking up with a hangover and a brand new baby. Not to mention, I was born with a huge tumor that covered the whole backside of my left leg. At first sight, the hospital thought it was leukemia. As I heard the story many times, she and I were released a couple days later. She had been living with her brother and sister in law, my uncle and aunt. That's where we went. And again, as the story told to me my entire life was that my aunt and uncle wanted to adopt me. Since she was single and my brother, that is 6 years older than me, was already living with my grandparents in Kentucky. To say that she was unstable at this time is an understatement. She refused to let them adopt me, in which my uncle holds a grudge on me to this day. Not her, me. She had an entire family wrapped. She never took or accepted blame or responsibility for anything. All of that got shifted, in this case, to a brand new baby girl, me. I was a child born of circumstance, and Lord, was it horrible circumstances. So, no to the adoptions, one of the best decisions that she ever made regarding me. And 2 weeks old, I was taken to Kentucky to my grandparents, of course, where my big brother already was. I have health issues, and my grandparents were not well off by all means. When I do think about what that must have been like for them, I feel guilty. A 6 year old, and then here comes the baby of the entire family with major health problems. To feed us, I know, was a struggle, let alone getting me to and from Lexington Hospital. God had his hand on all of us, that's for sure. After many, many tests, and I was almost 3 months old, I had to have surgery to remove the tumor on my leg. It wasn't leukemia, thank God above. Also, there were problems with my hips, so my hips had to be realigned. I'm sure it was painful, of course, too young to remember. But my grandma told me many, many times about that time. And she said when I was allowed to come home, that I could not be or lay on my backside at all. So she would tell me with this gleam in her eye that my grandpa, who I called Dada, would sit on the Davenport, not a couch, and hold me all day long, just so I wouldn't roll on my backside. She also told me many times that I was the biggest blessing to her and Grandpa. She told me, here you came, this beautiful baby with tons of hair and lots of health problems. Your grandpa became who I had prayed for him to be all along when you came along. Essentially, me being born and with health problems brought them closer together. I'm sure they became a wonderful team for my brother and I. She told me again many times that my grandpa, instead of being gone, sometimes for days at a time, changed to someone who didn't want to leave the house or me, for fear something would happen to me. My grandma didn't drive, and of course, there were no cell phones back then. And I'm not even sure if we had a telephone. It was during this time and after my surgery that my grandma said she discovered something unique about me. She told me several times with a smile on her face, every time. She would say, Tanya, in a way with her accent that only she could say. I loved the way she would say my name. But she would say, Tanya, I have raised babies, helped raise other people's kids, but I have never, ever seen a baby be in so much pain and with big tears running down your little cheeks. And she said, you would have the biggest smile on your face. I guess I learned how to smile through the pain at a very early age. I can still smile and cry at the same time. As I was told, my biological father came to see me at my grandparents' when I was a month and a half old. He knew I was his, and then he quickly was told to leave before anyone could see him there, and it would get back to my mother. He wouldn't see me again until I was 36 years old. More on that later on in my journey. See, even though my mom was 345 miles away 99% of the time, she maintained such power and control over my grandparents, and I become a pawn in her games. Every time my grandparents didn't agree with her or bow to her, and mind you, it could be over something so simple that most people wouldn't even waste their time arguing about, but it would be made out to be huge or a big deal for my mother. Every single time I was yanked out of their home and taken 345 miles away from what was my home, and as my great aunt, one of my guardian angels from birth, would later tell me many, many times, along with my second cousin, her daughter, that my great aunt would get notified that I was with my mother, so the scout would be on to look for me. As she and my second cousin would tell me these stories, I would be in disbelief. Let's just say my mother wasn't very particular on who watched me or what living conditions my babysitters had. I was always found eventually by my great aunt. Again, I thank God for her every time I think about this. She told me on several occasions I was found covered in urine, feces. My head would be completely flat on the back from laying so long. Mind you, I was delayed on motor skills because of my surgery. so I probably wasn't mobile. Many times she said I had thrush so bad in my mouth that they would have to give me milk through an eyedropper just to feed me. Many, many times I was told this happened. And also, I want to add, my mother was very intimidating and would literally fight anyone who overstepped her. So the only person that could overstep the line and find me and save me and bathe me and take me back to Kentucky, back to my grandparents, back home, was my great aunt. I truly believe that is the only person in the family that my mother would not go up against. My great aunt was not someone that would tolerate, and definitely not someone to be messed with. She did not play. I also want to add to this part of my journey, as I said, I was her pawn, but in the meantime, my big brother was old enough to remember her taking me and leaving him. Of course, too young to know I was being put into awful places and cared for poorly. All he knew was our mother was taking me with her and leaving him behind. This became a resentment towards me, again, me, not her, for the remainder of his life. This concludes my third podcast. Please stay tuned next Tuesday for my fourth episode. Many thanks to everyone that has listened and supported and loved me through this journey. Until next time, please remember, your journey is not over. God bless.
God only knows what you've been through. God only knows what they say about you. God only knows how it's killing you. But there's a kind of love that God only knows. God only knows what you've been through.